silent. Atlas, his German shepherd, didn't move. "You have 72 hours to leave," the man said. Claire Bennett opened Arthur Vance's notebook, but the inspector raised a hand. "Old drawings don't change safety codes." Then Atlas stepped forward, pressed one paw against the wall, and a warm breath of air slipped from a hidden seam. Everyone froze. Ethan whispered, "Atlas, what did you find?" They came to condemn a house. They were about to uncover its secret. The letter arrived on a Thursday morning, folded between a hardware store coupon and a notice from the insurance company, both of them ordinary enough to ignore. Ethan Walker almost did. He found the envelope on the floor inside his apartment in Boone Creek, Vermont, where the old radiator clicked and sighed against the wall and the coffee on the counter had already gone cold. The county seal on the corner made him pause. Official mail rarely brought comfort. It usually arrived dressed in clean paper and left a mess behind. Atlas noticed it too. The German shepherd had been lying beside the window, broad head on his paws, watching a thin rain turn slowly into snow. At 7 years old, Atlas carried himself with a quiet steadiness that made strangers lower their voices around him. His sable coat had darkened along the spine with age, and his amber eyes seemed to hold on to things Ethan tried to let pass. When Ethan bent to pick up the envelope, Atlas rose, crossed the room, and sniffed it once. Then he sat beside Ethan's boots, still and waiting. "It's mailboy," Ethan said. "Not a mission." Atlas did not move. Ethan gave a tired breath that almost became a laugh. He was 42, though there were mornings when the mirror gave him back a man older than that. Years in uniform had taught him how to read weather, land, weight, pressure, the small signs that told you whether something would hold. Civilian life had not offered the same courtesy. People smiled too quickly. Rooms felt too loud or too quiet. Questions arrived dressed as concern. He worked now at a lumber warehouse, fixed shelves, loading orders, repairing things other people needed but rarely noticed. It was honest work. It kept his hands busy. It did not ask him to explain the years he had folded away like uniforms at the back of a closet. He opened the envelope with his thumb. The paper inside was stiff and cold. It informed him, in dry language stripped of any human warmth, that he had been identified as the nearest living heir to a property on Pine Hollow Ridge, formerly belonging to one Arthur Vance, a distant relative on his mother's side. The property had been vacant for 28 years. It was currently classified as a non-residential structure due to prolonged disuse and unknown condition. He had 45 days to accept, decline, or allow the county to proceed with disposition. There was no photograph, no comforting description, no estimated value. Only a parcel number, a set of coordinates, and a warning advising inspection before entry. Structure. Ethan read that word twice. Not home, not cabin, structure. A word people used when they wanted distance from what something used to be. By noon, he called his Aunt Marjorie. She answered after several rings, and when he said Arthur Vance's name, the line went quiet long enough for Ethan to hear the small hum of her refrigerator. "Oh, Ethan," she said at last. "Don't take that on. You know it? I know enough. Up in the ridge, half buried in the hill, built strange, left stranger. Your family kept passing the paperwork along because nobody wanted to be the one to let it go. Why not sell it? Because no one wanted to explain it. Her voice softened, but the words did not. Let the county handle it. That place isn't worth anything." Ethan looked down. Atlas had moved closer, his shoulder brushing Ethan's leg. Not worth anything. The phrase should have belonged to rotten boards, rusted hinges, a roof with holes in it. Instead, it settled somewhere under Ethan's ribs. He thought of all the forms he had never finished, all the appointments he had canceled, all the polite faces that changed when they realized he was not the kind of veteran who turned pain into a clean little speech. "I hear you," he said. After the call, he placed the letter on the table and went to work, but it followed him through the day. It was there in the smell of sawdust, in the wet cuffs of his jeans, in the quiet ride home as snow began to stick to the shoulders of the road. When he opened his apartment door that evening, Atlas was beside the table, with his muzzle resting near the envelope, not guarding it, not begging, simply waiting with it. Ethan stood there, keys in hand. "It's probably a wreck," he said. Atlas blinked. "Probably cold." The dog's tail tapped once. "Probably nothing." Atlas lifted his head then, slow and certain. Ethan stared at the county letter. He did not imagine hope. He did not imagine healing. He imagined only a mountain road, an unwanted house, and a dog who seemed to know the story had not finished speaking. Ethan did not sleep well that night, though nothing dramatic happened to keep him awake. No thunder, no sirens, no nightmare sharp enough to name. Just the apartment settling around him in small, familiar complaints, the radiator ticking, the refrigerator shuddering, Atlas shifting once beside the bed and then going still again. Ethan lay on his back and watched the faint wash of streetlight move across the ceiling, thinking about the county letter on the kitchen table. He told himself it was paperwork, land, old wood, another responsibility he had not asked for. But the word structure kept returning in the dark, clean and empty and strangely cruel. By morning, he had folded the letter back into its envelope and placed it beneath a coffee mug, as if weight could make a decision stay put. His days in Boone Creek had a rhythm so plain it could almost pass for peace. He woke at 5:30 because Atlas did. He made coffee because the machine was there. He walked the same 4 blocks past the closed bakery, the laundromat, the veterans' clinic he had not entered in 8 months, and the small park where frost gathered on the benches like powdered glass. Atlas moved at his left side without pulling, broad shoulders level, ears listening to things Ethan no longer trusted himself to hear. People in town knew the dog before they knew the man. "Morning, Atlas," they would say, and then, after a careful pause, "Morning, Ethan." He did not mind. Dogs made better introductions. At 42, Ethan had the kind of body that still looked capable from a distance, but reminded him of its limits in private. A tightness in his lower back when the weather turned. An ache in one knee from years of carrying too much weight over rough ground. A stiffness in his hands that eased only after work began. He had served long enough to become useful in ways civilian life did not know how to measure. He knew how to read a slope before stepping onto it, how to brace a failing wall, how to make a temporary shelter hold against weather, how to stay calm while other people searched for someone to blame. Now he repaired shelves at Milner's Lumber and Supply, replaced split boards, loaded paint, counted bolts, swept sawdust into piles that returned by noon. It was honest work, and Ethan respected honest work. Still, some afternoons, while standing under fluorescent lights with a pencil behind his ear, he felt as if he had been built for a bridge that no longer needed crossing. No one at the warehouse was unkind to him. That almost made it harder. Kindness had edges when people were afraid of saying the wrong thing. His manager, Roy, gave him extra space during busy hours. Customers lowered their voices when they noticed the veteran patch on his old canvas jacket. A woman from church once told him he was so brave, while handing him a paper plate of cookies. And Ethan had thanked her because she meant well, even though the word brave sat on him like a coat cut for another man. He was not brave in the mornings, when the filled with dishes, and he let them sit. He was not brave when he drove past the clinic and kept going. He was not brave when he stood in the grocery aisle unable to choose between 2 brands of soup, because some small, tired part of him had run out of decisions. Atlas never mistook him for a symbol. That was one of the dog's gifts. Atlas did not ask Ethan to be inspiring. He asked for breakfast. He asked for the door to be opened. He pressed his head against Ethan's thigh when the room grew too quiet, not with pity, but with simple animal certainty. Here now, breathe. In the evenings, Ethan ate at the small table by the window. 1 plate, 1 fork, the radio turned low enough to become weather. Atlas lay nearby, following every movement with patient eyes. Sometimes Ethan spoke to him because silence had a way of thickening if left alone too long. He told Atlas about warped lumber, about Roy's bad coffee, about the elderly man who came in every Friday to buy 1 bag of birdseed and pretend he needed nothing else. He did not talk about loneliness. He did not need to. Atlas already knew the shape of it. After dinner, Ethan opened the envelope again. The county letter looked no different beneath the kitchen light. Pine Hollow Ridge, 45 days, non-residential structure, unknown condition. He traced the coordinates with 1 finger and felt, beneath his reluctance, the smallest pull of something he did not trust enough to call hope. Across the room, Atlas lifted his head from his paws. Ethan looked at him and shook his head. "Don't start." The dog's tail moved once, slow against the floor. Outside, snow gathered along the curb, softening every hard edge of Boone Creek. Inside, the apartment remained warm, familiar, and airless. Ethan folded the letter carefully, but this time he did not put the mug back on top of it. The next morning, Ethan brought the letter to work folded inside the back pocket of his jeans, though he had no practical reason to do so. It rode with him through the warehouse doors, past the smell of pine boards and machine oil, past Roy's tired greeting from behind the counter, past the first delivery truck coughing vapor into the cold. Every time Ethan bent to lift a box or measure a length of trim, he felt the paper press lightly against him, as if the house on Pine Hollow Ridge had become a second pulse. By lunch, he sat in his truck with the heater running and called Aunt Marjorie again. He told himself he only wanted details, nothing more. Information did not equal commitment. A man could ask about a road without taking it. Marjorie answered quicker this time, but when he mentioned the house, her voice lowered. "I was hoping you'd forget about that." Ethan watched snowmelt slide down the windshield in thin, crooked lines. Hard to forget something nobody explained. A long silence followed. Then Marjorie said Arthur Vance had never fit comfortably inside the family's idea of normal. He had been a builder, though not the kind with a company name painted on a truck. He fixed barns, repaired stone walls, helped farmers reinforce cellars before winter, and spent years studying old ways of building that most people had stopped respecting. He believed houses should listen to the land, Marjorie said, and Ethan could hear the faint embarrassment in her tone, as if even repeating the phrase cost her something. People laughed at that, said he talked about dirt and wind like they were relatives. Ethan did not laugh. He looked toward the tree line behind the lumber yard, where the white sky pressed low over dark branches. What happened to him? He got old, got stubborn, stayed up there too long. That's not an answer, Marjorie sighed. And for a moment she sounded less like someone warning him, and more like someone tired of carrying a box she never wanted. I don't know the whole story. Your grandmother said Arthur built that place after coming back from the service. Different war, different time, same silence. He didn't want a house in town. He wanted something that wouldn't ask him to explain himself. Ethan's fingers tightened around the phone. Outside, a forklift beeped in reverse, soft and distant through the glass. So why did everyone stay away? Because grief makes people superstitious, she said. And families can be cruel in quiet ways, not loud cruelty, not the kind anyone admits to. Just little decisions, not visiting, not asking, not wanting the trouble. After Arthur passed, the place became a story nobody wanted to finish. She paused. I'm not proud of that. Ethan stared at the dashboard, at the dust gathered along the vents, at the tiny crack near the speedometer he had been meaning to fix. He had expected gossip, maybe warnings about a collapsed roof or unpaid taxes. He had not expected recognition to rise in his chest, slow and unwelcome. A man comes home changed. A family calls it strange. A house waits on a ridge until people forget whether it was ever loved. Is there money owed on it? He asked. Back taxes were cleared through probate. There may be inspection fees, transfer costs, maybe a few $1,000s if you try to do anything official. But that's not the point. What is? The point is, you don't need another thing that needs saving. Ethan almost said, maybe I do. Instead, he said nothing. Marjorie softened again. Ethan, listen to me. You've worked hard to keep your life simple. That place is not simple. It's old, isolated, and probably full of problems. The road washes out. The power line was cut years ago. There's no guarantee it can even be lived in. Please don't turn some forgotten building into a test you have to pass. The words were meant kindly. That made them harder to reject. He thanked her, ended the call, and sat in the truck until Roy knocked once on the window and pointed at his watch. The rest of the day moved around Ethan without touching him. He loaded cedar planks for a contractor, cut plywood for a woman repairing her greenhouse, and helped an elderly customer choose weather stripping for a drafty back door. Practical things, fixable things. By closing time, a clean inch of snow had covered the parking lot, making every tire track look temporary. When Ethan got home, Atlas was waiting by the door with the calm certainty of someone who had never doubted his return. Ethan hung his jacket, fed the dog, and finally unfolded a map across the kitchen table. Pine Hollow Ridge sat 3 hours north, tucked behind county forest land and old logging roads. The route looked thin, almost hesitant, as if even the map did not fully believe in it. Atlas placed one front paw gently on the edge of the paper. Ethan looked at him. Everybody says leave it alone. Atlas leaned closer, warm and solid against his knee. Ethan thought of Arthur Vance, building a house that listened to the land, because maybe no one else had listened to him. He thought of Marjorie saying the place wasn't worth anything, and of how often people mistook neglect for proof that something had no value. He folded the map, slower this time, not a decision, not yet, but no longer a refusal. Ethan did not pack like a man chasing a new life. He packed like a man preparing to inspect a problem before deciding whether to walk away from it. That was what he told himself as he stood in the cold blue light before dawn, moving quietly through the apartment while Boone Creek still slept under a thin crust of snow. Into 2 plastic storage bins went the things that made sense: wool socks, thermal shirts, a heavy coat, work gloves, a first aid kit, batteries, a flashlight, a camp stove, canned soup, coffee, bottled water, Atlas's food, his medication, and the old tool roll Ethan had carried through more seasons than he cared to count. He added a tarp, rope, a hatchet, duct tape, a folding shovel, and a small notebook. Practical things. Objects with purpose, none of them required belief. Atlas watched from beside the door, ears lifted, tail still, his body carrying that restrained patience dogs have when they already know the answer and are waiting for people to catch up. "It's just a look," Ethan said, tightening the lid on the second bin. "We drive up, check the place, take a few pictures, come back." Atlas blinked once. Ethan looked around the apartment before turning off the kitchen light. It struck him then how little there was to leave behind. A coffee mug in the sink, a stack of unpaid but not overdue bills, a chair with one loose screw, a calendar still showing last month because he had not found any reason to turn the page. The room was warm enough, safe enough, familiar enough. But familiarity was not the same as belonging. He locked the door, then stood for a moment in the hallway with the keys in his palm, listening to the building breathe around him. Pipes, footsteps overhead, a television murmuring behind someone else's wall. Lives stacked close together and still somehow separate. Outside, Atlas jumped into the truck before Ethan had finished lowering the tailgate. The drive north began under a sky the color of unpolished steel. Boone Creek slipped away in pieces, the laundromat window glowing pale, the closed diner with its red sign humming, the veterans' clinic sitting silent at the corner, its flag snapping lightly in the wind. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel. Atlas sat upright in the passenger seat, nose angled toward the glass, watching the world change. Suburbs gave way to small farms, then barns, then long stretches of road where the houses stood farther apart, each with its own weather. The radio lost one station, found another, then gave up into static. Ethan did not turn it off. The noise made the silence feel chosen. By late morning, the road had narrowed and climbed. Snow thickened along the shoulders, packed hard where plows had pushed it aside. Pines gathered closer, black-green and watchful. The printed directions lay folded on the console, because his phone had already lost service 20 miles back, fading without ceremony, as if the modern world had decided not to follow him any farther. Ethan felt the old tightening beneath his ribs, the body remembering what the mind had not asked it to remember. Isolation, limited contact, unknown terrain. He breathed through it. Atlas turned and pressed his nose briefly against Ethan's sleeve. Not dramatic, not needy. "Just contact, I'm good," Ethan said, though he was not sure which one of them he was trying to convince. The last road was barely a road at all, only a pale track between trees, rising along the ridge in slow, uneven bends. Twice Ethan stopped to move fallen branches. Once the truck slid slightly near a shaded curve, and he sat still until the tires found their grip again. He almost turned around there. No shame in gathering information later, in better weather, with someone else along. But Atlas had gone very still, looking ahead through the windshield, every part of him focused. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. At first he saw only trees and slope and the dull white sky. Then the house emerged. Not suddenly, not with any welcome. It revealed itself the way stone reveals itself when snow melts around it. Slowly, reluctantly, as if it had been there long before roads, letters, or family arguments. It sat low against Pine Hollow Ridge, built into the hillside in uneven levels, the back half swallowed by earth and rock, the front framed in dark weathered timber. Narrow windows caught the gray afternoon light without giving anything back. Moss clung to the edges where wood met stone. Snow lay thick on the lower roof, but not as heavily as it should have. Ethan noticed that before he understood why. He turned off the engine. The silence arrived at once, deep and complete. Atlas did not bark. He only stood on the seat, front paws braced, breathing softly against the glass. Ethan looked at the house, then at the folded county letter on the dashboard. He had not come here for hope. Hope was too bright a word, too easily broken. He had come for an answer. But as Atlas waited beside him, steady as a promise no one had spoken, Ethan began to wonder whether some questions were not meant to be solved from a distance. Some had to be entered. Ethan sat in the truck for nearly a full minute before opening the door. The house waited ahead of him, low against the ridge, its dark timber face half hidden beneath the slope, its windows narrow and dull in the gray light. Snow moved softly through the trees, not falling so much as drifting, as if the mountain were breathing it out. He told himself to start with the exterior, check the roofline, look for sagging beams, photograph the foundation, make notes, keep things professional. But Atlas had already made a decision. The German Shepherd stepped down from the cab, landed soundlessly in the snow, and walked toward the house with his head low, following something Ethan could neither hear nor smell. "Easy," Ethan called, though Atlas was not rushing. That made it stranger. He was moving with care, almost respect, placing each paw as if crossing the floor of a church. Ethan grabbed the flashlight. The tool roll and the county letter then followed. The front steps were stone, uneven but solid under the snow. The door was thick oak, weather-darkened with an iron latch stiff from years of cold. Ethan expected resistance. Instead, after one hard pull, the latch gave with a deep wooden groan, and the door opened inward on air that was not warm exactly, but not dead either. That was the first thing he noticed. Old empty buildings had a smell, rot, trapped damp, the sour breath of neglect. This place smelled of dry earth, cedar dust, cold stone, and something faintly mineral like rainwater held in a clay cup. Atlas stepped inside before Ethan could stop him. He did not bark. He did not stiffen. He moved from corner to corner, nose near the floor, then lifted his head toward the ceiling as if listening upward. Ethan crossed the threshold and paused. The entry room was plain, stone floor, thick walls. Low beams, a long built-in bench beneath one window. Dust lay over everything, but not in the heavy choking way he had expected. It looked settled, patient, the kind of dust that came from waiting, not decay. His boots made small sounds against the floor. Outside, the wind threaded through the pines. Inside, it became almost nothing. Ethan closed the door behind him, and the silence changed shape. It did not press in on him like the apartment silence did. It held. Atlas moved toward a narrow passage cut along the left side of the room. Ethan followed with the flashlight. The passage sloped gently upward, its walls made of packed earth and stone, smooth in places where hands must have passed over them for years. Halfway up, Atlas stopped and placed his nose against the wall. Ethan aimed the light, no crack, no hole, no visible vent. Still, when he removed his glove and set his palm against the surface, he felt it. A faint warmth, not heat, not enough to explain. Just a trace, as if the wall had stored the memory of a fire long after the fire was gone. Ethan drew his hand back slowly. "That's impossible," he murmured. Atlas glanced at him, unimpressed by the word. They explored until daylight thinned. The house unfolded in levels, each one tucked deeper into the hill. A lower room cool and steady, a middle room with a stone hearth blackened by old use, an upper sleeping loft where the air was almost comfortable despite the snow beyond the windows. There was no electricity, no modern furnace, no sound of pipes, yet the cold outside never fully entered. Ethan found no obvious structural failure, no open roof, no floor ready to give beneath him. The place was rough, neglected, inconvenient, but it was not ruined. That bothered him more than ruin would have. Ruin was simple. Ruin gave permission to leave. As evening settled, Ethan unloaded only what he needed: sleeping bag, lantern, water, dog food, one can of soup, the camp stove. He ate sitting on the stone bench while Atlas lay near the passage, watching the dark mouth of it with calm attention. The lantern threw amber light across the walls, and the room seemed to gather around it. Ethan tried to read Arthur Vance's name on the county letter, but his eyes kept drifting to the beams overhead, to the careful joins, to the way every surface looked handmade by someone who had cared more about lasting than impressing. Later, after he rolled out his sleeping bag near the hearth, he expected the old restlessness to come. It always did in unfamiliar rooms. His body knew how to stay alert even when there was nothing to guard against. But Atlas circled once, lay between Ethan and the door, and released a long breath. The sound was so ordinary, so certain, that something inside Ethan loosened by a fraction. Outside, the mountain wind rose and moved around the house. Inside, the walls held their quiet warmth. Ethan woke once in the night and checked his watch. 3:17 a.m. For a moment, he did not know what had startled him. Then he understood nothing had, no dream, no sharp panic, no invisible hand pulling him back from sleep. Only silence, only Atlas breathing. Only an old house standing firm in the snow, asking nothing from him except that he remain until morning. By morning, the snow had softened the world into quiet shapes. Ethan stepped outside with a tin cup of coffee warming his hands and found Atlas standing at the edge of the ridge, nose lifted, ears turned toward the tree line. The dog was not alarmed. He was listening. A few minutes later, Ethan heard it too, the faint crunch of boots coming up the old road, steady and unhurried. A woman appeared between the pines in a dark green field jacket, knit cap pulled low, a pack over one shoulder, and a calmness about her that did not belong to trespassers. She stopped several yards from the house and lifted one gloved hand. "Morning," she called. "You Ethan Walker?" Ethan set the cup on the stone step. "Depends who's asking." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. "Claire Bennett, County Park Service and Heritage Office. I saw smoke from the upper vent. Figured either somebody was lost, somebody was stubborn, or Arthur Vance had finally come back to argue with the mountain." Ethan studied her. She looked about 39 with wind-reddened cheeks, gray-green eyes, and the composed expression of someone used to bad weather, bad maps, and men who mistook caution for suspicion. Atlas walked to her first. Ethan almost called him back, but the dog's body stayed loose. Claire lowered one hand without reaching too fast. Atlas sniffed her glove, then sat. "That's a serious endorsement," she said. "He doesn't hand those out," Ethan replied. Claire looked past him at the house, and something in her face changed. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition. Most people don't make it this far in January. I'm not most people. Nobody is, once you get them away from town. She stepped closer to the stone entry, careful not to track snow across the threshold until Ethan moved aside. Inside, she removed her cap and looked around with the quiet attention of a person reading a language written in beams, walls, and floor seams. She did not touch anything at first. She only stood and let the house speak. Ethan found that he respected her for it. "You staying here?" she asked. "Inspecting." "With a sleeping bag?" "Thoroughly inspecting." This time she did smile, but gently. "I'm not here to run you off, not today. But you should know the county still has this listed as non-residential. If someone decides to make an issue of it, they'll ask about safety, access, heat, sanitation, structural integrity. The words get dull, but they can move pretty fast once they're printed on the right forms." Ethan looked toward the passage Atlas had favored the night before. "It doesn't feel unsafe. Feeling and paperwork have never been close friends." Claire walked to the wall and held her palm an inch from the surface, not quite touching. "Still," she said softly, "this place is doing something." Ethan watched her. "You noticed?" "I noticed the snow on the lower roof is thinner than it should be. I noticed there's no modern furnace, and yet I'm not seeing my breath. I noticed the back wall is set into the hill at an angle that makes no sense unless it makes perfect sense." She finally placed her hand against the packed earth. Her brows drew together. Arthur wasn't guessing. Atlas rose then and moved into the sloped passage, pausing halfway up. He looked back once. Claire followed without being asked. Ethan followed both of them, feeling oddly like the least informed creature in the house. At the spot where Atlas had stopped the night before, the dog pressed his nose to the wall again. Claire crouched. She took a small thermometer from her pack, then a notebook, then a pencil worn almost to nothing. "Good boy," she murmured, not in the bright voice people used for pets, but in the low voice of someone thanking a colleague. Ethan felt something loosen in him at that. Claire did not treat Atlas like decoration. She did not treat Ethan like damage. She treated the house, the dog, and the man before her as things worth understanding before judging. "My grandfather used to say land remembers how people touch it," she said. "Build against it, and it fights you. Build with it, and sometimes it carries you longer than you deserve." Ethan looked at the wall, at Atlas, at the faint warmth hidden inside earth and stone. "You believe that?" Claire stood slowly. "I believe people throw away a lot of things because they don't know how to listen." Outside, wind moved over Pine Hollow Ridge. Inside, for the first time, Ethan felt the house was not only sheltering him from winter. It was introducing him to the idea that being understood might be different from being fixed. The first sign came as a sound too small for Ethan to trust. It was not a knock, not a scrape, not the restless complaint of an old house adjusting to cold. It was softer than that, almost deliberate, a faint whisper moving behind the packed earth wall in the sloped passage. Ethan heard it while sorting through a box of canned food near the hearth, but by the time he lifted his head, the house had gone quiet again. Atlas had not. The German shepherd stood halfway up the passage, body still, ears forward, nose nearly touching the wall. He did not bark, he did not growl. He simply listened with the full attention of an animal who understood that silence was not emptiness. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Atlas raised one paw and placed it gently against the wall. Not scratching, not digging, just pressing as if marking a place Ethan was too human to notice. Claire had come by that afternoon with a moisture meter, a bag of groceries, and the kind of practical concern she tried to hide behind professional language. She was outside measuring the roofline when Ethan called her in. By the time she stepped into the passage, Atlas had pressed his paw against the same section of wall 3 more times, each touch patient, careful, exact. Claire crouched beside him and ran her gloved fingers over the earth's surface. "He keeps choosing this spot, like he's voting on it," Ethan said. "Then let's not ignore the only one here with a working nose." She took out a flashlight and angled it low across the wall. Under the sidelight, a seam appeared so fine it looked at first like a shadow. Ethan had missed it because it did not announce itself as a door or panel. It was only a line hidden beneath dust and age, following the curve where earth met timber. Claire's expression changed. This was sealed. Ethan felt the words settle. Sealed meant intention. Sealed meant someone had closed it and expected one day, maybe, someone else might open it carefully. They worked slowly, using a putty knife, a small pry bar, and more restraint than force. No breaking, no tearing into the past just because curiosity had arrived late. The outer layer came away in thin flakes of dried clay, revealing a narrow wooden panel behind it. The wood was dark but sound, fitted into a frame with hand-cut precision. Ethan slid his fingers along the edge and found a recessed notch. When he pulled, the panel resisted, then released with a low breath of trapped air. Atlas stepped back but did not leave. Behind the panel was a vertical shaft lined with stone and old cedar boards, rising into darkness above and disappearing below the floor. A cool current moved through it, then shifted, carrying a faint trace of warmth from somewhere deeper in the hill. Ethan held the flashlight inside. The beam climbed along smooth stones, careful angles, small side openings cut toward the upper rooms. "It's not a chimney," he said. Claire leaned closer. "No soot, no burn marks." "Then what is it?" She did not answer immediately. She listened, the way Atlas had listened. The air moved again, gentle but unmistakable. "A thermal channel," she said at last, "or part of one. Maybe passive ventilation, heat exchange, earth tempering." Arthur built a spine into the house. The word struck Ethan harder than it should have. Spine. Not decoration, not accident. Something hidden, carrying strength through the body of the place. Atlas nosed along the bottom edge of the opening, then turned and walked to the far side of the passage, where an old bench had been built into the wall. He pawed once beneath it. Ethan knelt and found a loose board tucked under the seat, nearly invisible beneath a crust of dust. Inside the hollow space sat a small tin box wrapped in oilcloth. No lock, no label, just a strip of faded twine tied in a square knot. Ethan held it for a moment before opening it, aware of Claire standing quietly beside him, aware of Atlas watching as if he had been waiting years for this exact thing to be found. Inside were folded drawings, brittle but protected, along with a leather notebook darkened by age. The first page bore a name written in firm slanted script, Arthur Elias Vance. Beneath it, one sentence, "A house should not conquer winter, it should understand it." Ethan read the line twice. Claire unfolded one drawing across the bench. It showed the house in cross-section, half earth, half timber, with arrows marking airflow from lower stone chambers through vertical channels and into upper rooms. Notes filled the margins: morning sun, ridge wind, stored ground warmth, summer cooling, winter breathing. This was not madness. It was patience drawn by hand. It was a man studying a mountain until the mountain answered. Ethan touched the edge of the notebook with care. For the first time, Arthur Vance felt less like a name in a county file, and more like a presence in the room. Not a ghost, not a mystery for entertainment. A person, Someone who had built quietly because no one had listened loudly enough. Atlas lowered himself beside the open shaft, resting his head on his paws. Claire looked at him and smiled softly. He found the heart of it. Ethan shook his head, eyes still on the drawing. No, he said. He found the part that kept it alive. Ethan spent the rest of the afternoon reading Arthur Vance's notebook at the old bench beneath the narrow window, while snow moved past the glass in slow, slanting lines. Claire had gone quiet beside him, not because there was nothing to say, but because some discoveries asked for silence first. Atlas lay near the opened wall, his body stretched along the passage as if guarding the hidden spine he had found. Though there was nothing in the room to guard against except forgetfulness, the notebook smelled faintly of cedar, dust, and oilcloth. Its pages were crowded with measurements, weather notes, sketches of stone channels, and sentences that did not sound like a man trying to impress anyone. They sounded like a man trying to leave instructions for a future he was not sure would come. Arthur had written about winter as if it were not an enemy, but a demanding neighbor. He studied where the wind struck first, where snow gathered deepest, where morning sun touched the ridge for 9 brief minutes in January before slipping away behind the pines. He wrote about ground temperature, airflow, packed earth, stone mass, roof slope, condensation, and the cost of firewood for people who could not afford to waste heat. But beneath the practical notes, something more human kept appearing. A house should not punish a tired body for being tired. A room should not make an old man choose between warmth and food. A door should open easily for hands that ache. A floor should hold without asking who is worthy of shelter. Ethan read that last line 3 times. Outside, the world was white and indifferent. Inside, the words seemed to put a hand against his chest. He had expected blueprints. He had not expected mercy drawn in pencil. Claire unfolded another page and found a list titled, "For Those Who Come After." It was not legal language. It was not a will. It was a set of principles. Written plainly: build low where the wind is high. Let the hill carry what pride cannot. Save heat before asking for more. Repair before replacing. Never confuse simple with poor. Never confuse quiet with empty. Ethan looked toward the walls around him, thick with earth and patience. All at once, the house no longer seemed strange. It seemed considerate. Every odd angle, every low ceiling, every narrow window had been a choice made by someone who had understood limits without shaming them. Arthur had not built a monument to himself. He had built a place where a person could survive winter without feeling defeated by it. They called him odd, Ethan said. His voice came out rougher than he intended. Claire looked at him, then back at the notebook. "Mr. Walker, this structure is not approved for occupancy." The county inspector's voice echoed through the old Hillside house. Ethan stood by the stone wall. He thought of the way people spoke about veterans in public, with flags and polished words, and the way they sometimes stepped back in private when the story was not clean, cheerful, or easy to carry. He thought of every form that had reduced a man to check boxes, every conversation that turned away when gratitude became discomfort. He had spent years believing respect meant being thanked. But Arthur's notebook suggested something deeper. Respect was not applause. Respect was design. It was making room for real weakness, real weather, real bodies, real silence. It was asking what a person needed before deciding what they deserved. Atlas rose then and came to Ethan's side, pressing his shoulder against Ethan's knee. The weight of him was warm, grounding, unquestioning. Ethan rested one hand on the dog's head. Atlas had never asked him to be easier. Never asked him to explain the nights he sat awake, or the mornings he moved slowly, or the long, quiet spells when words felt like tools misplaced in snow. The dog simply adjusted, stayed closer when the room grew too still, waited when Ethan needed time, reminded him without language that dignity could survive in ordinary acts. Claire closed the notebook gently. "This place matters," she said. Ethan looked around the room again, at the wall Atlas had opened, at the old beams, at the careful dark lines of Arthur's drawings. For the first time since the letter arrived, he did not think of the house as a problem to solve. He thought of it as a voice that had been speaking for decades beneath the snow, saying the same thing over and over to anyone willing to hear it. Nothing becomes worthless simply because it has been left alone. Not a house, not a man, not a life waiting quietly to be understood. The letter from the county arrived 6 days after Claire submitted her preliminary notes. and it came with the kind of politeness that made Ethan feel tired before he reached the second paragraph. It acknowledged receipt of historical materials concerning the Pine Hollow Ridge structure. It thanked him for his cooperation. Then, with clean spacing and careful words, it stated that continued occupancy could not be recommended until a formal safety review had been completed. Access, ventilation, sanitation, emergency response, load-bearing conditions, and heating compliance would all need to be evaluated. The inspection was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 10 in the morning. Ethan stood beside the old table, the paper held loosely in one hand, while wind dragged snow against the narrow windows. Atlas sat at his feet, watching him with that grave, unwavering patience that had become harder for Ethan to ignore. "There it is," Ethan said quietly. "The part where they decide a thing doesn't fit their form." Claire had warned him this might happen, but warning did not soften the arrival. For the rest of the day, Ethan moved through the house with a restlessness he tried to disguise as preparation. He stacked firewood more neatly than it needed to be stacked. He swept the stone floor twice. He wiped dust from the old beams, then felt foolish for doing it. As if a clean beam could persuade anyone to see dignity where they had already decided to see liability. By evening, he had opened the storage bins and begun placing things back inside: shirts, tools, cans of soup, the camp stove, Atlas's food. Not all of it. Just enough to call it sensible. Just enough to leave before being told to leave. Atlas watched from the passage. When Ethan carried the first bin toward the door, the dog rose and walked slowly ahead of him. Then he lay down across the threshold, broad body stretched from jamb to jamb, head resting on his paws. Ethan stopped. "Move, Atlas." The dog did not move. "I'm not doing this with you." Atlas blinked once, calm as stone. Ethan set the bin down harder than he meant to. The sound echoed in the entry room and faded into the walls. For a moment, he felt anger rise, not at the dog, not really, but at the familiar shape of surrender dressed up as practicality. He had done this before. Left appointments before they could disappoint him. Ended conversations before they could turn kind in the wrong way. Packed his life into small containers so no one could take much from him. Atlas lifted his head, and the anger went out of Ethan as quickly as it had come. The dog was not blocking the door to win. He was holding a line Ethan had forgotten he was allowed to hold. Claire arrived the next morning with a cardboard folder, a thermal camera borrowed from the Heritage Office, printed photographs, copies of Arthur's drawings, and a thermos of coffee strong enough to qualify as structural support. She found Ethan sitting on the bench, one hand on Atlas's head, the county letter open beside him. "You thought about leaving," she said. It was not a question. Ethan looked at the doorway, still thinking. Claire took off her gloves and placed the folder on the table. "Then think with all the facts." They spent 2 days preparing, not like people staging a performance, but like people giving truth the courtesy of order. Claire labeled the drawings. Ethan marked the thermal channels. They recorded temperatures at dawn, noon, and midnight, comparing each level of the house to the air outside. They photographed the roof, the stonework, the dry wall cavities, the hidden shaft Atlas had found. Ethan wrote a statement about Arthur Vance's design in plain language, then rewrote it when Claire told him plain did not mean small. On Tuesday, 2 county officials arrived in a white SUV, both polite, both cold, in the professional way of people who had learned not to be moved too soon. One was named Harold Pike, narrow-faced, clipboard ready. The other, Denise Calder, wore glasses that fogged each time she stepped between outside and in. They asked questions. Claire answered some. Ethan answered others. Atlas remained beside him, quiet, neither performing nor pleading. At first, Harold saw only what the form trained him to see. Irregular construction, limited access, non-standard heating, remote location. Then Claire opened Arthur's notebook. Ethan showed the thermal readings. People do that when they don't have the patience to understand someone. Ethan ran his thumb along the page edge. This house isn't unsafe because it's different. It's different because someone understood this ridge. I'm not asking you to pretend it's perfect. I'm asking you not to mistake unfamiliar for worthless. Harold did not soften all at once, people rarely do, but his pencil slowed. Denise asked to see the shaft again. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, the old house held its breath, and for the first time in years, Ethan did not leave before being heard. The decision came in a thin envelope on a morning so clear it made the mountain look newly made. 3 weeks had passed since the inspection, 3 weeks of measuring, waiting, repairing small things that did not require permission, and learning the particular patience of old houses. Ethan had expected the delay to hollow him out, but it did not entirely. There had been mornings when worry rose before the sun, when he stood at the window with coffee cooling in his hand, imagining official language turning the house back into an object, a risk, a file to be closed. But there were other mornings too. Atlas trotting ahead through fresh snow, Claire stopping by with weather reports and county updates she pretended were casual. The house holding its quiet temperature while winter pressed against the ridge like a hand against glass. Ethan had begun to understand that waiting did not always mean helplessness. Sometimes it meant staying. The envelope was waiting in the mailbox, nailed to a post at the lower road, where the plow passed twice a week if the driver felt generous. Ethan found it after walking Atlas down through the pines, the dog's paws leaving clean marks beside his boots, county seal, same stiff paper, same official weight. He carried it back without opening it, not because he was afraid, though he was, but because some things needed witnesses. Claire arrived just before noon, her cheeks pink from the cold, a wool cap pulled over her hair, 2 coffees balanced in a cardboard tray. She saw the envelope on the table and stopped. "You didn't open it?" Atlas said to wait. Atlas, lying beside the hearth, lifted his head as if willing to accept credit. Claire set the coffee down carefully. Smart dog. Ethan sat. His hands were steady until they touched the paper, then they were not. He opened the envelope with a pocket knife and unfolded the letter once. Twice, the room going very still around him. The county had completed its preliminary review. The Pine Hollow Ridge structure, formerly classified as non-residential due to prolonged vacancy, would be granted conditional historic status pending final documentation. Temporary occupancy would be permitted under a preservation agreement. Repairs were to be supervised, original thermal channels protected, structural changes reviewed, and future study encouraged. Ethan read the sentence again because it did not look real the first time. Temporary occupancy would be permitted. Claire closed her eyes for 1 second, then smiled in a way Ethan had never seen from her before, unguarded and bright enough to change the room. "They listened," she said. Ethan looked at Atlas. The dog had risen and come to his side, pressing his head beneath Ethan's hand, warm and certain. Ethan tried to speak, but his throat tightened around the words. For years he had believed relief would arrive like noise, like celebration, like some bright thing breaking open. Instead it came quietly. It came as paper on a table, a dog leaning against his knee, a woman across from him wiping at one eye and pretending the cold had done it. A house that did not need to prove anything because someone had finally looked closely enough. Spring came late to Pine Hollow Ridge. It did not rush in with flowers and blue skies. It arrived in small permissions, water dripping from the eaves, moss darkening along the stones, the first bare patch of earth near the lower steps, sunlight lingering a little longer in the upper room. Ethan worked slowly. He replaced rotted trim with woodcut to match the old boards. He cleared the air channels without widening them. He repaired the front step, oiled the latch, and cleaned Arthur Vance's notebook page by page before sealing it in a proper archival sleeve Claire brought from town. He did not try to make the house modern in the way people use the word when they meant forgetful. He let it remain itself, only steadier. People began to come by once the story moved through the county. A building professor from Burlington, a local historian, 2 retired carpenters who stood in the passage with their hands on the walls, nodding as if greeting an old friend. Ethan did not enjoy attention, but he found he could bear witness. He could tell them Arthur's sentence. A house should not conquer winter. It should understand it. He could show them the shaft Atlas had found. He could explain how a thing dismissed as strange had been carrying wisdom all along. One evening, when the last snow had retreated into shaded pockets under the pines, Ethan sat on the upper step with Atlas beside him. Claire was inside, labeling drawings at the table, humming softly without realizing it. The ridge smelled of thawing earth and cedar. Far below, Boone Creek and all its noise felt distant. Not rejected, just no longer the only place his life could happen. Ethan rested his palm against the wall beside the door. It held the day's warmth gently, the way Atlas held silence, the way Claire held questions until they were ready to be answered. They said it wasn't worth anything, Ethan said. Atlas leaned into him. Ethan looked at the house, at the timber, the stone, the hill that carried it, and something in him finally stopped bracing. They were wrong about the house, he whispered. Then, after a long breath, maybe they were wrong about me too. The wind moved softly through the hidden channels. Not a howl now, not a warning. Only a steady breath passing through old work made new by attention. The house had not saved Ethan. Not exactly. It had simply stood long enough for him to remember how to stand too. If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories about loyalty, healing, and second chances. Tell me in the comments which moment stayed with you most, and where you're watching from tonight. Denise placed her bare hand against the packed earth wall and said nothing for several seconds. That silence changed the room. Ethan spoke then, not loudly.